My name is Julia Venturi, and I grew up watching my parents build their sports nutrition empire from scratch. Some people may think that being born into a rich family means living in luxury and comfort, but this is not the case at all. My parents, especially my father, made sure from the very first day that I understood the value of hard work. I still remember the day my dad brought me to the office for the first time. I was only 7 years old, and I dressed up in my favorite blue dress with small flowers, trying to look as serious as adults. My father sat me down at a small table in his office, and leaning on a massive oak table, looked me intently in the eyes. "One day it could all be yours," he said, gesturing around the spacious room filled with bustling employees. "But you're going to have to earn it, just like I do." These words are deeply embedded in my mind and have become part of my upbringing. While the other kids frolicked in the pool or played in the park, I studied inventory management, basic accounting, and customer service. Mom sometimes worried that I was missing out on the opportunity to be a child, but I loved every moment I spent in the company. She became my second home, and the staff became my second family. College flew by in a flash, filled with business courses, endless internships, and the desire to prove your competence. By agreement with my father, I started from the very bottom. I worked in a warehouse, then in the logistics department, and then in sales. No privileges, no favors. I wanted people to see me not just as the daughter of the owners, but as a professional who knows his job. After graduating from university, I completely immersed myself in the company's affairs. The days were filled with endless reports, meetings, and strategic plans. I just didn't have time for my personal life. Sarah, my college roommate, often joked that I was married to my job, and maybe there was some truth to that. Everything changed at the company's annual holiday party. As usual, I stayed late at the office, completing quarterly reports, and arrived at the event later than everyone else. When I finally entered the hall, the festive atmosphere had already captured all the guests. Someone was laughing, someone was dancing, someone was animatedly discussing business. It was then that I saw him for the first time, Parade Carcano, the representative of our branch in Turin. Tall, with warm brown eyes and a slight smile, he looked relaxed but at the same time focused, as if he was always in control of the situation. When he came up to me and held out his hand, I couldn't help noticing that his handshake was confident, but not rude. "You must be Julia," he said. "I've heard so much about you." "I hope everything is good," I replied with a smile, shaking his hand. He narrowed his eyes as if assessing me, and then, cocking his head slightly to one side, added, "They didn't mention that you're beautiful." I laughed, feeling the weariness of a long day's work dissolve into his voice. We talked all evening, discussing not only business, but also life, dreams, and family. He listened to me so attentively, as if every word I said mattered to him. When the party came to an end, he asked for my phone number. From that day on, every morning began with his warm good morning message, and every evening ended with long conversations. I began to find myself waiting for these messages, that a day without his voice seemed incomplete. One night, after another video call, I made an offer without hesitation. "Why don't you transfer to the main office? We could be together, and it would benefit your career." There was a pause on the other end of the line. He then replied softly, "Julia, I can't. My family is here in Turin. Parents, sister, little nephew. We're very close, I can't leave them." My heart skipped a beat. It seemed as if something elusively important had slipped through his fingers. But then he added, "But why don't you move here? The Turin branch needs someone with your experience." I spent the day thinking about this suggestion before deciding to talk to my father. When I entered his office, I stopped at the door, wondering where to start. But in the end, she just said, "Dad, I need your advice." I watched his face carefully as I told him about the parade and the offer to move to Turin. To my surprise, my father just smiled. "I was wondering when you'd ask," he said. "Parade has a good reputation in the company, And the Turin branch really lacks strong leadership, if that's what you want. I will do it. 2 weeks later, I was standing in Parade's apartment in Turin, surrounded by cardboard boxes. The spacious living room, bathed in warm sunlight, resembled a cozy corner from an interior magazine. Wooden shelves with books, a pair of armchairs with soft cushions, muted pastel shades of the walls. There was no ostentatious luxury here, but there was a sense of home, something real, long-suffering, and valuable. "Welcome home," Parade said, coming up to me and pulling me into a hug. I inhaled his scent, a mixture of woody notes and a light citrus scent. Somewhere deep inside, there was a feeling that I was exactly where I should be. The first meeting with his family took place earlier than I expected. They all lived together in a modest 2-story house: his parents, Basilio and Alessa, sister Beatrice, and her teenage son Leon. When we arrived at their house, my palms were sweating. I was nervous. I wanted his family to like me. I wanted them to accept me not just as a bride of the Parade, but as a part of their world. As soon as I entered, Alessa, a short woman with smoothly combed dark hair and piercing eyes, greeted me with a slight smile. "Your family must have a huge mansion," she remarked, looking at me carefully. "It's probably going to seem too easy to you here." I felt my cheeks turn red. "Oh no, not at all," I hastened to reply. "We've always lived pretty normally. No mansions or private jets." "But of course, with your family's wealth," began Basilio, a tall man with thick gray hair. "I've been earning my own living since I was a kid," I said firmly. "My father always believed that you need to earn everything you have." I noticed Alessa and Basilio exchanging disappointed glances. Perhaps they expected to hear something different. Beatrice, Parade's sister, looked me up and down in silence. Her gaze lingered on my simple sweater and jeans. "If I had your money, I wouldn't wear anything but designer clothes," she chuckled. I just shrugged, not knowing what to say. Parade squeezed my hand under the table but didn't say anything. 2 months later, during an evening walk in the park, he proposed to me. It was not a lavish romantic spectacle, but a quiet, meaningful moment, a simple ring, a sincere question. "Yes," I said at once, without hesitation. But when it came to planning the wedding, we had our first major disagreement. "A huge hall, hundreds of guests, all the decorations you can imagine," Parade said enthusiastically. "Baby, we don't need all this," I argued. "Let's do something small and meaningful." He reluctantly agreed. As a result, we had a modest ceremony with only our closest friends. But even that day, I could hear Alessa leaning over her sister, whispering. I expected something much more grandiose from a person with her background. I pretended I hadn't heard, but those words stuck in my head, hurting deeper than I was willing to admit. The ink on our marriage certificate had barely dried when the housing issues started. We were having Sunday dinner at Basilio and Alessa's. The atmosphere was familiar. Beatrice was typing quickly on her phone, Leon was playing video games in the corner, Basilio was watching sports on TV. Alessa, handing me the mashed potatoes, spoke casually. "Have you talked to your father about buying you a house? Something in the Cherry Creek area would be ideal. I was just looking at the ads there yesterday. There is a beautiful 5-bedroom apartment with a swimming pool." I almost choked on the water. "Actually, we plan to save up money and buy a house on our own," I replied calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Basilio turned off the TV and turned to me, and Alessa froze, her fake smile gone. They exchanged glances, the kind of glances that made me feel like I'd said something terribly wrong. "But your father probably won't mind," Basilio finally spoke up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "It's natural for parents to help their children get started." I took a deep breath, trying not to sound annoyed. "Parade and I want to do this on our own," I said firmly. "We both work and we can save up. I believe in earning what you have." There was silence in the room again. It seemed to me that even Leon stopped pressing buttons on his controller. Parade sat next to him, tense but silent. I looked at him for support. Parade reached for my hand under the table. His palm was slightly damp, as if he was nervous, but nevertheless he decided to speak. I support Julia in this, he said, although there was no firmness in his voice. Besides, my apartment is in perfect order, he added, trying to look confident. I've been filming it for many years now, and it's in a great location. Alessa's eyes suddenly flashed, as if a brilliant idea had occurred to her. She set down her glass of wine a little louder than necessary and folded her arms across her chest. Well, if you're staying in the apartment, Julia has to pay the rent. After all, she earns a lot more than you do, Parade. That's fair enough. I felt something constrict inside me. My husband nodded, too quickly for my comfort. It makes sense, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. That's $3,000 per month. The amount took me by surprise. Yes, Turin was an expensive city, but even for our neighborhood, it seemed like a lot of money. However, I didn't want to start a conflict when the tension in the room could already be cut with a knife. Of course it's fair, I said in a flat voice, trying not to show my emotions. That's how our routine was established. Every month, I handed over $3,000 to the peer, and he paid the rent. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of him making a transfer on his phone, but every time I passed by, he quickly closed the screen. It went on like this for a while, until one day, when I was looking at our monthly expenses, I thought about it. Hey, I said one evening at dinner, when the noise of the city came through the open window. Since I'm paying the rent, maybe you should arrange an apartment for me. This would be logical for taxes as well. Parade's reaction was instant and strange. He flinched, almost dropping his fork into the bowl of pasta. His face paled slightly. No, that won't do, he said hurriedly, his voice sounding higher than usual. I've been renting an apartment from Mr. Johnson for many years. He trusts me. We don't want to interfere with a good thing. Something in his answer made me uneasy. He didn't meet my eyes, and his fingers were shaking as he reached for a glass of water. But I put that feeling aside, as I put aside the other little things that have been bothering me lately. Life in Turin got into a rhythm. I got used to my role in the branch, managed the team, held strategic meetings, and called my parents every week. At first glance, everything seemed perfect. But there was one problem that bothered me. The first time it happened was on Tuesday. I came home from work early, feeling a headache, and found Alessa and Beatrice in the apartment. They were snuggled up on my couch, watching TV and eating the expensive salmon I bought for Parade's birthday. Oh, Julia, Alessa said without even getting up. We just had a bite to eat. I stood in the doorway, keys clutched in my hand. Their shoes were right on my coffee table, magazines were scattered, and the kitchen looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. This has become a common occurrence. I'd come home and find them here, or I'd see evidence of their visits. Empty food containers, traces of their perfume in the air, moved items in the closet. They were obviously rummaging through my stuff. They had the keys. Of course they had the keys. One evening, I decided to talk to Parade. Darling, I began carefully, don't you think it's strange that your mom and sister come here whenever they want? He didn't even look up from the phone. Family, Julia, you're being dramatic, calm down. But I couldn't calm down, especially after I caught them looking through my personal documents one afternoon. They were sitting in the living room, laughing and giggling, and in their hands was my college diary, a diary that I had brought with me and hadn't had time to unpack yet. Beatrice flipped through the pages, reading aloud notes from my past. Sarah says I work too hard. Maybe she's right, maybe I'll never learn to relax. She mimicked my voice, giggling. Alessa smiled. Oh, Julia, you were so serious even then. I froze in place, I was shaking. What are you doing? My voice cracked with suppressed anger. They turned to me, completely unashamed. We need to talk, I said firmly, though my hand was shaking slightly. This is not normal. You can't just walk into our house without warning. You can't go through our stuff. Alessa's face instantly wrinkled. I saw her eyes fill with tears, and then the tears began to flow, as if someone had turned on a faucet. How dare you? Stop it, she howled, her voice trembling with impending hysteria. After all we've done to welcome you into our family. I felt the tension in the room thicken, like a heavy thundercloud. I knew you thought you were too good for us, Alessa continued, sobbing. With your habits, with your bizarre past. I opened my mouth to protest, but at that moment, Parade came into the apartment. His gaze darted from his mother, who was sobbing on his shoulder, to Beatrice, who pressed her lips into a thin line, and then to me, who was frozen in bewilderment and rage. What did you do? His voice was harsh, almost accusatory. He rushed to his mother, gently stroking her back as she choked on her tears. She's trying to distance us from you, Alessa sobbed, clutching at his shirt. She says we're not welcome here. That's not what I started, but Parade cut me off. They are my family. After Alessa and Beatrice left, Parade turned to me, his face grim, as if carved out of stone. You need to fix this, he said in a flat voice. Buy them something very beautiful, and apologize. The next day after work, I went shopping. I chose a designer bag for Alessa, which she had long hinted at, and a pair of expensive boots for Beatrice. My hands were shaking as I wrapped them in wrapping paper. When I brought the presents to his parents' house, they greeted me with smug smiles. We knew you'd come, Alessa drawled, not even looking at me as she looked at her bag. They'll do, Beatrice added, trying on the boots in front of the mirror. That night, Parade finally spoke to me again. You see, he said, kissing me on the cheek, it's much better this way. But something has changed, something I couldn't figure out yet. After the border incident, things only got worse. Alessa and Beatrice have turned demanding gifts into a real art. Every minor holiday became a reason for new expectations. Julia, do you remember that next week is National Sisters' Day? Beatrice wrote to me in a message. I saw a gorgeous Gucci handbag. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the day I first held Parade in my arms when he was a baby, Alessa announced at a family dinner. I think a spa weekend would be appropriate to celebrate this event. The requests were endless. Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day. Even Groundhog Day has become an excuse. When I questioned whether Alessa should buy a $500 scarf for Arbor Day, she burst into tears during a family dinner. I think some people just don't understand what family loyalty is, she sobbed, wiping her eyes with a napkin. Beatrice, who was sitting next to her, patted her on the back sympathetically. Later that evening, Parade looked at me reproachfully. Julia, why are you so complicated? They're your family now, too. I took a deep breath, trying to control myself. Parade, don't you think this is getting out of control? Last week, your mom asked for a designer watch because it was National Ice Cream Day. He shrugged his shoulders, as if it was completely unimportant. If you can afford it, why not help your family? I looked at him, and something inside me shifted. As if the situation wasn't stressful enough, Beatrice's 15-year-old son, Leon, started showing up at our apartment more and more often. At first, I tried to be patient. All teenagers go through difficult periods, right? But one night, he took it to a whole new level. I spent hours cooking lasagna according to my grandmother's recipe. I wanted him to feel that I cared about him, no matter what. When Leon sat down at the table, he took a bite, grimaced, and pushed the plate away with a bang. It's garbage, he said. I froze. Mom says you probably can't cook because you grew up with servants who did everything for you. I felt rage rising in me. Leon, this is inappropriate, I said firmly but calmly. But he didn't even let me finish. I need $60 to go to a movie with my friends, he interrupted, looking at me defiantly. I took a deep breath. No, Leon. He kicked the kitchen chair sharply, and it slid across the floor. You're rich, stop being such a miser. Stop it, he shouted. Mom says you're just pretending to be poor to make yourself feel better. I stared at him in disbelief. Later that evening, when I changed into my pajamas and went to bed, I tried to talk to Parade. I hoped that he would finally understand why Leon's behavior was unacceptable. Honey, I began carefully, your nephew was just unbearable today. He demanded money from me, and when I refused, he made a scene. Could you talk to him? Parade didn't even look up from his phone. You need to figure this out for yourself, he muttered. Consider it a practice. We'll have children of our own someday. You need to learn how to deal with these situations. I felt my irritation rising. Parade, this is different. Leon is not our child. He's a teenager who's being disrespectful. But my husband just shrugged his shoulders. Leon reappeared the next day. I need a new video game, he said without even saying hello. No, I replied calmly. Without waiting for the money, he just collapsed on our sofa, turned on the TV, and turned the volume up to maximum. I love these fake humble rich people, he muttered, making the sound even louder. I glanced at Parade, hopping for support, but he just silently left the room, leaving me alone with his grinning nephew. At that moment, standing in my own living room while a teenager was openly disrespecting me, I felt more alone than ever before. 2 years. It's amazing how much can change in 2 years. Or maybe how much you can convince yourself that everything will get better if you try hard enough, patient enough, you will give enough. I'm going to visit Mom and Dad this weekend, I said over breakfast. Do you want to come with me? He asked, barely looking up from his phone. I can't, he said shortly. I promised my mom and Beatrice I'd help with some things. The road to my parents' house was calm. As soon as I entered the house, Mom hugged me, and Dad told me some ridiculous jokes that made me laugh until I cried. Mom made my favorite lasagna. For a few hours, I felt like myself again. Julia, who knew who she was and what she wanted. But life can shatter the world. When I opened the door of our apartment on Sunday evening, I was literally knocked down by the stench. The stench of cheap beer, stale pizza, and something worse filled my lungs. I froze in the doorway. Empty cans littered every surface. Cigarette butts were floating in pizza boxes. Towers of plastic cups threatened to collapse right on the carpet. And in the midst of all this chaos, Leon and his 5 friends are randomly scattered around the living room, sleeping among the debris left over from an obviously violent party. I could feel the rage growing inside me, turning into an uncontrollable fire. Get up, I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. All of you, get out of here. The teenagers stirred, sleepily rubbing their eyes, and began to pack their things. Everyone except Leon. He stretched lazily, yawned, and looked at me with the same cocky grin that I was beginning to hate. Why should I leave? He said casually. I live here. I felt my heart tighten. What did you say? Well, he reached for a half-empty beer can. I had a fight with my mom and grandma. They decided that I was annoying them too much. He shrugged lazily. Uncle Parade said I could stay here. My head started ringing. Leon, we're renting this apartment. We may have problems because of you. I tried to speak calmly, but my voice was trembling treacherously. Leon laughed. He actually laughed. We're filming, he mimicked me, snorting. Oh, that's funny. I felt my skin prickle. What are you talking about? Leon lazily leaned back, as if he was going to enjoy the moment. You really don't know anything, do you? I took a step forward, trying to contain my panic. Leon, explain yourself. He leaned closer, his grin widening. This apartment has always belonged to Parade, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather forecast. He's had it since his great-grandfather left it to him. The room spun. I grabbed the door frame to keep my balance. What? Everyone knows, Leon added, shrugging his shoulders. All except for me. I couldn't speak, I couldn't breathe. 2 years of rent. For 2 years, every time I offered to register a lease in my name. For 2 years, every time he evaded an answer. For 2 years, every time he quickly hid his phone when transferring money for rent. It was all a lie. I probably looked like I was about to faint, because Leon, who had been arrogant and self-confident, suddenly changed his expression. The grinning teenager disappeared, and someone else appeared in front of me, confused, almost sympathetic. He awkwardly patted me on the shoulder. There's something else you should know. I turned my glazed gaze on him. Leon took out his phone, turned it over in his hands, clearly hesitating. I recorded some of their conversations, he confessed. I blinked, not understanding what he was getting at. I started doing it when they were saying nasty things about me, but they talk a lot about you too. He pressed a button, and Parade's laughter came from the speaker. The same laugh that I once loved. She's perfect, my husband said, still laughing. 3,000 a month right in my pocket. She doesn't even ask herself that question. I felt my stomach tighten. Leon started the next entry. Talk about family loyalty, it was Beatrice's voice. She gives up every time. I bought a new bag last week, just make sure you get pregnant as soon as possible. My heart skipped a beat. Then Alessa's voice. As soon as the baby is born, her daddy will have to buy you a house. There's no way he's going to let his grandson live in an apartment. Leon looked at me furtively, as if he was unsure whether to turn on the next recording. But then I clicked play. She's such an idiot, Parade's voice sounded slurred, as if he was drunk. It doesn't satisfy me even in bed. Thank God for Amanda, and Julie, and whatever her name is from accounting. My vision went dark. Just be careful, darling, it's Alessa again. Don't let Julia catch you, at least until we get the best out of her. The phone slipped out of my numb fingers. Restart it, my voice was barely audible, shaky, broken. Can you send them to me? Leon nodded quickly, tapping something on his phone. A few seconds later, my own phone made a notification sound. He stood up, gathering his things at the door. Before leaving, he stopped for a moment. I'm sorry, he said softly. They're all snakes, you know, always have been, even Mom. I looked at him, unable to say a word. Leon shrugged his shoulders. That's probably why they hate me so much. I can't pretend to be like them. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone. One in the trash, can that used to be my house? Alone with the truth about my marriage. I didn't clean up the mess. Let this be the perfect metaphor for my life. It has a beautiful facade that hides a lot of trash underneath. Instead, I got in the car and drove straight to Alessa and Basilio's house, where I knew they would all be having their Sunday family dinner. I didn't even ring the doorbell, I just pushed it open and went in. They were there. Parade, Alessa, Basilio, Beatrice. They were sitting at the dining table, a perfect family portrait. It was as if they had stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting depicting the comfort and unity of a family. The scene made me feel sick. Julia, Alessa's fake smile flashed instantly. We weren't expecting you. How are your parents? I didn't answer. I was only looking at Parade. Show me the lease agreement for our apartment. There was an instant silence in the room. The fork in Parade's hand froze halfway to his mouth. What kind of lease agreement? Lease agreement, I repeated. Show it to me. He blinked, and then, putting that smile on his face that I once loved, he shrugged his shoulders. Oh, honey, you know, Mr. Johnson doesn't sign official contracts. We have known each other for many years. Mr. Johnson doesn't exist, I cut him off. The apartment belongs to you, always has been. Alessa intervened so quickly that it was almost funny. Julia, honey, would you like some stew? Her voice was high and nervous. I tried the recipe you mentioned. Shut up, Alessa. My voice was icy. There was a deafening silence in the room. They all stared at me in shock. I've never talked to them like that before. I've never taken that tone before. But I was different now. Parade, I said slowly. What have you been doing with my $3,000 every month for the last 2 years? He chuckled, but I noticed sweat breaking out on his forehead. Come on, Julia, he drawled, shrugging his shoulders. It doesn't really matter. Since I'm the owner of the apartment, what's the difference? We're married, what's the difference? I took out my phone. Let's see what the difference is. The color drained from their faces as Parade's voice filled the room. It's perfect, he laughed. $3,000 a month right in my pocket. She doesn't even ask herself that question. I pressed the button, and the speakers filled with their voices. I listened to them again, but without pain. Talk about family loyalty, Beatrice declared mockingly. Just make sure you get pregnant, Alessa added. And then the last one. She's such an idiot, Parade's voice, drunk, pleased with himself. It doesn't satisfy me even in bed. Thank God for Amanda, and Julie, and whatever her name is from accounting. Just be careful, dear, Alessa said. Don't let Julia catch you. At least until we get the best out of her. I stopped recording. There was absolute silence in the room. The Parade was ghostly pale. Beatrice looked like she was about to throw up, and Alessa's carefully made-up face couldn't hide her horror. I straightened up. I'm divorcing you, I said, looking straight into Parade's face. Wait for the newspapers this week. He jerked as if he'd been hit. If you try to contact me about anything other than the divorce proceedings, I picked up the phone, these recordings will be published. I'm sure the business community will be thrilled to learn how you cheated your wife out of $72,000. I turned around and went out. They were saying something, trying to stop me, but their words meant nothing to me. I returned to the apartment, to his apartment, and methodically began to pack my things. At sunset, my car was loaded, and I headed to the place where I was always welcome. To my parents' house. When I arrived, Mom and Dad were still awake. They understood everything at a glance. I sat down at the kitchen table and told them everything. I showed them the notes. With each revelation, his father's face grew darker. I'll handle this, he said when I was done. And he really figured it out. Parade was fired the next day. His father made sure that his reputation in the business world was completely destroyed. The divorce process was quick. At first, Parade tried to fight, but the recordings changed everything. The judge was particularly interested in the aspect of financial fraud. The Parade left with nothing, except for his apartment and his ruined reputation. 3 months later, I returned to the company's headquarters. I threw myself back into my work, slowly rebuilding my life. And that's when I got a message from Leon. We met for a cup of coffee. He looked different, more mature, less angry. I got a job at the car wash, he said. I moved away from my mom. Did they find out that you gave me the notes? He nodded, grinning. The best mistake I've ever made. I looked at him. I can help you, I offered. If you want, I'll find you a job at the company. He shook his head, smiling a little. Thanks, but I need to do this myself, from scratch. He sighed. You know, I'm saving up for community college. I understood him. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to leave everything behind and build something new, something real, from scratch. That evening, I was standing in my new apartment. In my real apartment, with this lease agreement in my name, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking at me was no longer the one who had succumbed to Parade's charm 2 years ago. She became stronger, wiser, and finally truly free. I took the phone and deleted their numbers. One by one, the last ray of the setting sun ran over the diamond on my ring finger. But it wasn't the ring that Parade had given me, it was my grandmother's ring, present just like me. Outside the window, the city was coming alive with evening energy, full of new features, full of new beginnings, and I was ready for mine. Write a comment on what you think about this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.